Welcome to Undercurrents of Romance, the show that celebrates every subgenre of romantic fiction. In each episode, I peel back the layers of your favorite love stories and chat with the talented authors who bring them to life. I'm your host, Tracey Devlyn. Now, let's dive in with today's guest. Hello, romantics. I'm here with New York Times bestselling author Sabrina Jeffries, considered by many to be a true legend of the romance genre. Sabrina is here to talk about her latest historical romance, Hazardous to a Duke's Heart. Welcome to the show, Sabrina.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Oh, my pleasure. It's just such an honor to have you here, really. So I have to get us started, and I have to ask, how does one become queen of the sexy Regency?
I don't I don't know how well, okay. So my publicist years ago wanted to dub me that, and I'm like, there's a lot of other authors who are writing sexy regencies. I don't feel comfortable with that. My publisher was like, no, that's good. We should do that. Everybody just talked over me, and then next thing I know, it's on my website. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'm queen of the sexy regency right now,
I
but
love it. I love
I
it.
just, they come up with these things and you kind of have to go along. But yeah.
No, it's great. I think you should absolutely own it. Absolutely.
That's what they said. Just own it. I'm
You
like,
know,
okay, if you
yeah,
say
as I
so.
mentioned before, I hit the record button. I won't say grew up because I'm not that young, but from the earliest memory I have of picking up a romance novel, I picked up a Sabrina Jeffries novel. So
Oh,
I absolutely consider you queen of the Regency. You
oh,
betcha.
well, thank you. I knew I was getting on in years when somebody said, "Oh, they're talking about your book over on old school romances." And I went, "What? Really? I'm already old school?"
Oh my
Like, and
gosh.
and so I went to look what qualified as old school, and it was anything that was published before the year 2000. And I went,
Okay. I know.
okay, I did kind of get in there, slip in there, because Pirate Lord came out in '98. That was my first Sabrina Jeffries. But I had been writing for 6 years before that. I had been published for 6 years before that as Deborah Martin and Deborah Nicholas. But still, it was like, wow, I am getting older.
I know. I can't get over that, some because I grew up in the 80s. That's my
Yeah,
teenage years and things, and I still can't get over that 80s music is considered classic now. I just
I
refuse
know.
to call it
Uh,
classic.
I know, I one of my friend's kids said something about, well, my dad listens to this group called, what is it? I think it's called the Beatles. And I'm like,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, yeah, don't say that around Mr. Gonzalez because he won't like it. That's my
Yeah.
my husband.
A
And
husband, yeah. Oh,
my
great.
husband Renee is like huge Beatles fanatic,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, he was like, "What do you mean? Some band called the Beatles?"
That's hysterical. That's
Yeah.
hysterical. Well, today,
So,
as I mentioned, we're here to celebrate your newest Regency, Hazardous to a Duke's Heart. What can you tell us about this new book?
okay, so this. Do you want to know the origins of how I came up with it, or
Absolutely. Or if you want to give us kind of the elevator pitch now,
so?
the
Yeah,
teaser, yeah, and then
the
we'll get into all that a
yeah,
little bit later.
the 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 historical background of it is that all of these people were imprisoned in France for 11 years, and I'll get into that later if we want to talk about that.
Yeah.
But so this man and his two friends come back after having been in France in Verdun, which was one of the major camps during the Napoleonic Wars, and they'd been gone for 11 years, and they had a lot of adjusting to do.
Mm,
They went off on their grand
yeah.
tour and then didn't come home. And one of them, it was on his grand tour. Actually, two of them were sort of on their grand tour. And um, so he comes home. He meets his. He has a mentor who dies before they leave France. And so his mentor's daughter has become his sister's governess. And so his mentor on his deathbed had said, just see that my daughter gets married, that she's taken care of. And so he's like, okay. And he doesn't expect her to be, this lively, pretty, amazing woman. And he has a lot of guilt about what has happened with his mentor. And so he feels like it would be wrong to marry her, given what happened, that she would hate him once she hears, et cetera, et cetera. And but she likes him. And so, but he decides to secretly offer her a dowry that she doesn't know about and claim that it was her dad's money. He cobbles up some reason her dad had all this money in this prison camp, and
which she is very suspicious of.
She's kind of skeptical, but
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And he says, so your dad wanted me to give you this dowry so you could marry. So we want to introduce you and give you a season and all of that, because his dad was what they called a bear leader then, which is the person who brought you on your grand tour, the adult who brought you on your grand tour. And so, he wants you to marry, which was true. He wanted him. He didn't ask the hero to marry him. But anyway, he comes back, he finds out he's the Duke. He's got all these estates. He's his two brothers have died. Lots of things can happen in 11 years. And especially when the second half of those 11 years, there's no correspondence with England. And so he tells her he wants to do that. And she says, okay, I'll give you. She wants to use the money for something else. He's like, what? That's what happens when you tell somebody, your dad left you $5,000 for a dowry. Does it have to be a dowry? Because I'd like to start an art school for women. So, yeah. So then
which made his eyes just bug out, right?
Yeah, but they make this agreement that if she will demonstrate that she could successfully run an art school, then and she says, I want to show you that I can run an art school, so let me give you lessons in art. And he says, but you have to go to all these balls and whatever at night. During the day, you can give me lessons in art. At night, we're going to go, to these things. So that's the premise of the story, which I should do an elevator pitch for, because obviously it's way too long for an elevator pitch.
But I love it. It's great. It's such a fun story. I was really curious about, these, I won't even try to pronounce the French.
Détenus.
Détenus. Okay.
I actually, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but that's how I've always.
That's how it's in. Yeah.
I mean, I took French at some point, so I hope I'm right, but.
Works for me. I wouldn't know if you were wrong. So, do you recall when you first, I guess, became aware of these civilian war detainees?
It was interesting. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and on kind of on top of that, piggyback that a little bit is, when did you know that you had a story to tell?
Okay, so it's really strange. I was reading. I'm a Jane Austen fan. And I was reading of all things, the letters or the diaries, I think it's the letters of her cousin who married her brother. So they were first cousins.
Yeah.
But that
the Regency times.
Then.
Yeah.
But anyway, she had written all these letters, and this was the letter she sent. And at some point, she talks about bribing these people to help her escape France when the end of the Treaty Amiens, when the Treaty of Amiens lasted a year from 1802 to 1803. And it broke down. Actually, it was more like 14 months or something. But anyway, it broke down. It negotiate, the whole treaty just fell apart because really the British, he wasn't, Napoleon wasn't saying, I'm going to give up my dictator ways. And, anyway, so they, so there's this note about it. And then the footnote was about this long on a page about this long. I mean, it was this huge footnote and said, during this period, the Treaty of Amiens happened. And when it ended, because, Napoleon was doing some things they didn't approve of. So the British took some of his ships. It was kind of, I mean, it was never going to work. Napoleon was not ready for anything like this.
No.
And so he did some things they didn't approve of. So the British took his ships. And so then they declared war again on France. And so Napoleon retaliated by saying every male in the country between the age of 18 and 60, every British male, I'm sorry, has to go to these camps, will not be allowed to leave France. We're keeping them prisoner. Now, you keep prisoners in wartime, but you don't usually keep civilian prisoners. Mm-hmm. They had prisoners of war, and they had a mechanism for housing prisoners of war who were soldiers who were captured, naval officers who were captured. But these were men who, some of them had families, and so their families couldn't really leave easily. And so they ended up in these camps. And so there were 10, they called them depots. I used the word depot when I first wrote the book, and my agent said, that just sounds like the train station or something. I'm like, okay, it's more French than it is English for that. But anyway, they had about 10 camps and in various places. And they didn't want them in Paris. He didn't want them in Paris because they'd be, stirring up trouble. So he put them in all these camps. And they were informed that if they did not report to this office and at such and such a day, then they would be captured. And then it would not go well for them or whatever. So a lot of people ended up, there was a duke who was already a duke, actually, and very young, 17. And his mother and his stepfather were in France, and they were put in one of the camps for 3 years. And she agitated to get her son released because she said he wasn't 18 when you took him. So you're going against your own rule. That's the only reason he was let go. But the Duke of Newcastle spent the first 3 years of it in but it's hard to explain because the camps were mostly fortified towns. Mm-hmm. So you could send everybody in at night, and it was fortified, and there were soldiers, and nobody, could get out. But there were people who, had shops and whatever. And some of the town was outside of the fortifications. You could go outside, but you had to sign something. You had to leave your passport with them inside if you did go outside of the town. And if you tried to escape, if you just went outside and didn't come back, they called them the peasants. The peasants were told that they would get a reward for capturing them. And so they couldn't go anywhere. And they were up in Verdun is like up in the mountains. It's really cold up there, and it's on the border of I forget, it's not on a border now, but it was on the border of what I think is now Belgium, but I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the map. I can't remember.
Okay.
Geography is, despite all the travel I've done, not my strong suit. But anyway, so I read when I first read it, I went, can you imagine being somewhere? Because all it said was, and the people who were who were taken prisoner at this time didn't go back until the first war was over. As
Mhm.
most people who read Regencies know that in 1814, Napoleon was sent to Elba, but then he escaped, and there was everybody thought it was all starting again, and then there was Waterloo, and that was the real end. And this time they sent him to St. Helena, where he couldn't escape. So this was but it said, they were there until 1814. And I went, 11 years?
Yeah.
These people were there 11 years? What would
Hmm.
you do if you went, on your grand tour and then suddenly
Can you
you can't
imagine?
go home for 11
Yeah.
years? And it was kids, there were whole families, there were everybody from dukes to, there's only one duke that I knew of, but there was a marquis and his wife who died in a camp of cholera.
Mm.
And the family, they had him buried. At that point, there was some communication between France and England, and they requested that he be buried in some, I don't know, steel coffin or something, that they
Mm.
both be buried together. They were an elderly couple, and so the family actually paid at the end of the war to have them transported back to
Wow.
England so they could be buried in England. But lots of cool stories. And once I started doing the research and it took me a while to find all the information, because I kept looking up, various words, and I couldn't get anything. I couldn't find anything. And when I saw somebody refer to them as détenus, which actually is what the British called themselves, it was the French term, and then they adopted it. Once I saw that, because it's the French word for detainee, um, I looked up debt news, and the world opened up. I found all kinds of,
Isn't that
especially,
amazing?
I use
Yeah.
Google Books a
Yeah.
lot because I can find books in Google Books,
Yeah.
and I can do searches and
Hmm.
everything. So I can find period books. Like, they wrote a lot of books, the people who tried to escape, the ones who were successful in escaping, the ones who weren't successful in escaping, um, the ones who spent the whole war there. They all wrote books. That was
Mm.
the thing right after
Interesting.
the war, writing books about being
Yeah. Yeah.
détenus.
Yeah.
And there's several books. There's at least 10 published books on
Yeah.
Google about. So I found all these published books, and so they would give accounts. And of course, they're kind of accounts, some of them, contradict each other, and then
Mm.
there's some things I had to separate fact from rumor and fiction, and I don't know how well I did it, but some of the things that I talk about in the book, I know it makes it sound like there's a lot of history in the book, and that it's all taking place in a prison camp, but my book
Yeah.
starts when they leave the prison camp. There's a prologue that gives you an image of what it
Hmm.
was like, and then it starts. I really was more interested in the aftermath, what that would do to you, what would happen if you left somewhere, you had been gone 11 years. It's just fascinating to me. It finally dawned on me that the reason this interested me so much was I moved to Thailand. My parents and my family moved to Thailand when I was 7. My first time back, I was 11 going on 12. I was 7 going on 8 when we went there. And my parents would go for 4 years, and then they would have 1 year furlough and 4 years and 1 year furlough. And so during that first 4 years, I didn't see my grandparents.
Mm.
I really missed my grandparents. I was old enough to remember my grandparents. So my siblings, I was the oldest. So like my little brother, was born there. So he didn't meet his grandparents until he's 4 years old. And
Uh,
uh, it it's not quite the same. I just thought, I remember 4 years was a long time to be away from home.
mm.
11 years his way beyond that.
Yeah.
And I remember how hard it was to adjust. We would go on furlough. I got into an argument with somebody in a store because because they tried to charge sales tax. Mom gave me so much money for candy. I had very good, we had just gotten to one set of grandparents. So that was the first place we stopped. And I went down. They said, y'all could go to the corner store and get some candy. So we go, and I've got my 25 cents or whatever it was. I had very carefully, I was always good at math, figured out, how much candy I could get for American candy I could get for 25 cents. And I
Uh-huh.
go up there and she's like, it's 27 or whatever it was then,
Mm-hmm.
27 cents. And I'm like, no, no, it can't be because I added it all up. It's right. And I just said finally, I like she's cheating me, but I don't it's a grown up and I have to give her. So I gave her the 25 cents, let her take away, I don't know, a piece of candy. And
Oh.
I get home and I said, Mom, they stole from me at the beginning. She was like, oh, I should have mentioned sales tax. In Thailand, they don't have sales tax.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was not used to paying sales tax. It was just pure highway robbery to me. Because
Those adults, yeah.
it was really but it's just little thing. You don't think about the little things you forget, the adjustments you have to
Hmm.
make. And I just loved the idea of these three guys who um, they actually attempt an escape and end up in a real prison for the
Yeah.
last 3 years, a notoriously bad prison, which is where they sent people when they tried to escape. And for a while, there were so many attempted escapes, that Napoleon said they were going to shoot them. They were going to put them before the firing squad. That never happened. I know the British went, you try that, bud. And I'm sure, it was just this delicate situation. The British didn't want to acknowledge that. I mean, the French were always trying to trade, like, okay, we'll send you your Duke home, the Duke of Newcastle. We'll send him home. You send us one of our generals, and they're like, he's a civilian. This guy's an officer. No, we're not doing that. But if you're one of those detinees, you're like, they're doing nothing to get us out of
Yeah.
here, and they really couldn't, because it was a known courtesy of war that you don't take civilian prisoners, and they just did, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and that was considered pretty bad. So yeah, it was interesting. I just became so fascinated. I went down a rabbit hole in the research when I first was writing
It's
Hazardous.
easy to
I kept
do. Yeah.
I said, my agent said, so how's the book going? I said, I'm having a little bit of problem because I just really am researching more than. She's like, stop researching and write the book.
Yeah.
It was just
Yeah.
so fascinating to
Well,
me.
as you said, it's not them in the prison, and it's not full of, all this history that you're talking about as far as your research, but you gave us enough of a flavor about what the camp was like, and again about this, the Duke coming back, and how his life has changed, because when you think about it, for 11 years they had sort of, I'm sure that there was a society that they built, in these towns,
Right,
but
right,
it was kind of an aimless existence. And then he comes back and he has all of this responsibility for the dukedom, which he did not expect, right? and
right,
and
right,
added responsibility of trying to get his mentor's daughter married as
right.
well. So
Marriage, yeah,
I thought you did a wonderful job, feeding us just enough to get the flavor of it, and also getting us immersed into his struggles. I thought it was
right,
wonderful, absolutely
right.
wonderful.
Well, thank you. I
Yeah.
really did have fun writing it, but it was hard. knowing how much to put in of I just had to
Mhm.
resist the urge to put big long, that kills a story.
It does,
Big long
unfortunately.
explanations of,
Unfortunately for us, but
things. It really kills the story.
yeah,
And the one I'm writing, the second one is Heathbrook and Giselle. Uh, and you'll find it. I don't want to say who Giselle is
yeah.
because that's a spoiler. But anyway, she's French, so she knows what things were like,
Yeah, yeah,
and she was there. So, but as not a captive, as a, she's on the other side. So
right.
that I like that because I get the perspective, both sides, and what things were going on for the
Hmm.
French. And oh, and the best source I had for all of this was this woman wrote her thesis on that whole phenomenon.
Mm.
And she said the same thing I kept saying. She was like, how come nobody's ever written about this? And I'm like, I know, it's just like it faded into history and nobody ever talks. They talk ad nauseum about all the
Yeah,
battles. I
yeah,
mean, you can find a million sites about Napoleon's battles and Wellington's battles and the ones he won and the ones Napoleon won.
yeah.
But this is barely mentioned. It's like a blip in
Hmm.
history. And but she did extensive research on things like how many children were born in the camps.
Mm.
And she took all these records and just parsed them down to the interesting things. So I read practically her whole thesis just because it was fascinating.
Wow.
And I did put a link to the thesis because it's publicly available and all of that. I don't know why she's never published it. She has published some other scholarly articles. I used to be a professor, so I like that stuff.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
get a
yeah.
little excited about it. But yeah, I just found it also interesting and lots of fodder for drama. I
Yeah,
wouldn't mind doing a series that was set there, but it would be hard to do, I think, as romances are a fantasy, and
hmm,
it's hard to maintain a fantasy. It would be more historical fiction or historical mystery or
yeah,
something like that. And I don't, I really am not a fan of historical. I like romance. I like a romantic relationship. And
sure.
I know there are a lot of things that are kind of in the middle for that.
Yeah,
There's a romance, but it's not like it is. But I like historical romance. I grew up reading historical romance back when they weren't central. So my mother let me read them. She wouldn't have let me read them if they, but when I was in college, they started with the ones that were very sexy, and I was like, "Ooh, I really like these." So that
yeah,
was it.
opens up a whole new world.
I was sold forever after
Yeah.
that.
Well, one of the things I like to dive into on this show is finding the story's undercurrent with the author. It's that
Mhm.
second beating heart of the story that flows beneath the lover's journey and helps propel the story forward. Do you have any thoughts on what the undercurrent that might be flowing beneath Tori and Jonathan's love story?
You mean other than the detonation?
Well, obviously that's one of them for sure. I don't know if
I
you can think
mean,
of another one or.
yes. The problem is it's kind of a spoiler, but I've already talked about it in another interview, so I guess it's okay. Um, and I do reveal it a few chapters into the book. But Tori has a disabled brother, and I have a disabled son who is more severe. Well, more yeah, much more severely disabled than her brother. But I I'm in this period, my husband and I are in this period where our son is growing older, but he's still a lot younger than we are, but we're growing older. We're not going to be here for the rest of his life,
Hmm.
probably. And we did not have any other children because my son's profoundly autistic, and we were quite aware that autism is very genetic, and we did not think we could handle two autistic children. I know a lot of people have two or three, but we just didn't think we could manage that, especially with me having a
Yeah.
full-time career and everything. And I worry about him, the future for him. I think about it a lot. And so the parts where Tori's worried about her brother, I really understand. I
Mm.
completely identify with those. And so uh, I do use those things a lot in my books
Hmm.
because my dad has dementia. So I had a book where somebody's parent, actually it was a grandparent for the heroine, had dementia, and that really was those stories. For me, get into the things that are really close to my heart because,
Hmm.
so this is the first time I've put a disabled child in a book. I actually had my third historical romance is Sabrina Jeffries was supposed to have a disabled child. And Avon said, no, 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 you write light, you write funny, you cannot put that in. Nobody wants to read that. It's too sad. Da da da. And at the time, I had a disabled child, and I'm like, I live this every day. It is not. I do not go about in sackcloth and ashes
Yeah.
because my son is disabled. My son is disabled, and he's just different from other people, but
Yeah.
he's still my son, and he still has lovely qualities.
Hmm.
And actually, Nick grew up to be such a sweetheart that he makes everybody happy whenever he's around them, which is we had some real challenges when he was young because he is severely profoundly autistic.
Well, I have a couple of fun questions here for us before we
Okay.
ended up. So you obviously you're a romance writer, romance reader. You know that tropes exist in romance novels.
Right.
Can
Right.
you think of two or three tropes that readers can look forward to in Hazardous to a Duke's Heart?
Um, you can't say enemies to lovers. I guess in a way it's a Cinderella story, and I don't actually like Cinderella stories. I don't usually write them, so that was weird for me. But it is. She is. Her father was a professor, and
Yeah.
and so she's and except for the fact that he's not a beast, she's like Belle,
Yeah.
studious and well, interested in art. But yeah, there's I guess that would be the closest trope. Uh,
Definitely secrets maybe too, huh?
Oh, I tend to do secrets in almost every book. I like secrets. I do because, in my own family, I've found out secrets and my family is not a secret keeping family, but mom would say something, I'd go, "What?" And she was like, "Well, you know that da da da." I'm like,
No.
"No, I never knew that. This is the first time I'm hearing it." "Oh, I thought I told you kids." "No, you did not." you know? So, I just, I found out a secret about my grandfather when I was much older. Actually, I was pregnant with Nick, but I wasn't a kid. And my grandmother had a heart attack. She's gone now. And my dad, I found out from my dad that I knew that my great grandfather was a bond salesman and did stocks and bonds and had some money and everything. What I didn't know was that he got arrested for doing some illegal bonds, and he had several kids, and he convinced his my grandfather to go to jail for him to take the rap. He said, "I've got to support the
Wow.
family, and you're too young to support the family. So if you just say you did it without my knowledge, then that'll work." And he went to jail. And it ruined my grandfather's life. It really
Um,
did. And my grandmother thought she was dying. She was not dying at that point, but she thought she was dying. And she told my dad, I just want you to understand your dad, why he was the way he was. And this is why, because he had planned to be a lawyer. And of course, he could not be a lawyer because he'd gone to prison. And I've
Oh,
always wanted to use
wow.
that in a book.
Yeah.
In fact, I said, Dad told me the story, and I went, oh, I would have used that in a book. He said, wait till your grandma dies. I'm like, Dad, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna, of course I'm gonna wait.
Do you have a recommendation about a romance book that you've read recently that you enjoyed and loved?
What have I read recently? Well, my friend Ursula wrote an interesting book called Thornhedge, which was a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. So I liked that, but it's more of a novella. And my friend Deb Marlowe writes. I read a lot of hers because she writes historical mysteries. Um, and I really enjoy I'm not much of a mystery person, but she has just enough romance, and her mysteries are twisty enough that I
Mhm.
really enjoy them, and she always surprises me. For me, it's the surprise.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I like a surprise. Um, I had one I was raving about not too long ago, and now it escapes me. I
Yeah.
wasn't prepared for that question. Should have been
No,
prepared for
sorry.
that question,
What
but
was what was your
you know.
friend you said Marla? Marlowe? Is it Deb
Deb
Marlowe?
Marlowe, yeah.
Okay,
She's
yeah.
her series, it's called the Keir Levitt Mysteries.
Okay.
And the interesting thing about them is the first one was set around the time of the Crystal Palace. So they're really Victorian.
Okay.
And the heroine is very interesting, but they're both artists. But they get into a lot of trouble because, well, he has a whole backstory that doesn't get, it takes like 5 or 6 books to unravel his backstory. And she never told me this stuff. So, I didn't want her to tell me. I wanted
Yeah,
to
yeah, I was
read it
surprised.
fresh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
Great.
then the heroine was kidnapped when she was young, and because her family had a lot of money, and so she was kidnapped. They were going to get a ransom, and her butler is the one who figured out who had taken her and rescued her. And so she said, I want to learn. And she was a certain age, she was old enough. She wasn't like a
Mhm.
little kid. She was, a little older. And she said, I want to learn everything there is to know about keeping me safe. I never want to be in that
Yeah.
position again.
Mm.
And so he got her all these tutors to teach her how to do all these various ways of protecting himself. So she's just a really wonderful character. And you hear all the time about, well, the Regency woman wouldn't have done that then, da da da. It's like, do they know about, and I know I'm gonna screw up the title, but Lady Stanford, I think it's Stanford, who traveled all over Egypt and the Middle East by herself, rode camels. There were women who did these things.
Yeah.
You just never hear
Outliers. Yeah.
about them. Yeah,
Hmm.
there were always outliers. So she has an outlier heroine. I always like the outlier heroines. So I don't know if you know, but with my heroine, one of the things about my heroine that came out of my research was she was, I had to do research on art. She's a sculptress and stuff. I did not know. I ended up in the Royal Academy, for in England, reading about the history of the Royal Academy. They had their first female member. I want to say it was the 1900s.
Mm.
You could go to the Royal Academy, and I think it might have been 1950 or something. It was late. You could go to the Royal Academy. You could present works in the Royal Academy, but you couldn't be the founding people. There were two women, And that was the last women in the Royal Academy and the Royal Academy was started in 17 something. And I'm not good with dates either.
That's
But
all right. That's a long. It's
I
a long
mean,
time
I
to go.
just could not believe that. It
Yeah,
just
that's
stunned
something,
me.
isn't it?
So yeah, I there were a lot of women doing things, but you did not hear about them because institutions like that just did not believe women could do those
Hmm.
things and that kind of thing. So yeah, I like the outliers. I like that.
Well, thank you for those recommendations. Before we go, can you give us a hint of what's coming up next? It sounds like you're working on book two, perhaps?
Yes, I
Yeah.
have two more books. The two friends, they're not they're not related at all. I did debate about doing maybe a family or something, but you know how it is. It's when
Yeah.
you're doing heroes, you want the heroes to. I love the ones where the heroes are brothers, but these guys have been through the fire together,
Yeah,
and that also
absolutely.
does something, to
Bonds them
you.
in a way.
And but
Hmm.
they're not soldiers, so they're in this in between state of they've experienced and seen things that somebody who's an earl or a duke never would have seen or
Yeah.
experienced.
Yeah.
And so, and some of those people, some of the real debt news, didn't survive very well.
Mm.
So it's been fun for me to balance the suddenly they're back and everybody's kissing the
Yeah.
ring and they're like, how did I land here?
Right, right, right.
And so, yeah, so the next one is Heath Brooks' book, and he's kind of the flirt, but it covers up a lot of things. And then the last book is going to be uh, Scoville's book, who I named after this very famous uh, code breaker in the Napoleonic Wars.
Ah, nice.
And anyway, he's a Marquis's son, but of course, all the Marquis's other sons have to have died so he can become the Marquis.
Yeah. It's been a
But
bad 11 years for some
yeah,
of
I
these.
mean, it has been. Well, the interest I got that actually, there were two guys who were Earl's heirs. They were from a family of four brothers. And one by one, the brothers in the period of that time died without
Yeah.
heirs. And so one of the guys from one of the camps ended up as the heir. So I took that right out of history, but I'm like, it's amazing to me that that happened more often
Yeah.
than you'd think.
Hmm.
You'll see if you look at the trees and the lines and how they go, it's like this one and then this one dies and then this one and then it's going through all the brothers and then there's no brothers left so they have to go back up here to the to the one before. They
Yeah.
have to go to the root, so to speak, because you don't inherit from your brother, you're inheriting from your father. And
Right.
so you have to go up and then it's like, well, he had a brother, so we have to go one up there and then so then this whole another branch because the branch becomes the branch of nobility because these guys just couldn't produce heirs. It's not as easy as you think to
Yeah, well,
produce the
medicine was a little bit
requisite
different.
or
Yeah, medicine
heir.
was a
Yeah.
little bit different, that back
Uh-huh, it
back in
sure
the day for
was.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't
Well,
have to worry
folks,
about that anymore.
yeah, yeah. Folks,
So
when this episode airs, Hazardous to a Duke's Heart will be out, so be sure to order your copy today. Sabrina, what social media outlets are you most active on?
I'm most active on Facebook. I love Instagram, but I am not visual. I am much more, oral. I I like music. I like,
Yeah.
I'm okay. I talk a lot. I know you didn't notice, but
You have
anyway,
great stories.
yeah. But
Absolutely.
uh, but I love visual things, but I don't have that eye, so I can do some Instagram, but I'm just not really
Yeah,
good at
more
Instagram,
Facebook.
and so I prefer Facebook. I was on Twitter. I just can't be on Twitter anymore. It's just
Yeah.
too hard, and what are the other ones?
Blue
I have
Sky
not.
Threads.
I
Yeah, Blue Sky
haven't done
Threads.
threads. I've thought about going into threads and seeing what it's like, but I haven't done that. Those I go down rabbit holes with those things, and I just don't have time these days for that.
Yeah.
And I
Well, they
don't do
say you
TikTok.
know. Yeah,
I
I haven't
do.
ventured there yet either.
And
So
you're doing videos. You'd
I
think that
know, I
would
know.
be
You
your
think it would be
natural
a good
fit for
fit,
you.
but
I
I like
just don't.
talking to people about, having the focus on me is always a different story. So
Oh, yeah. My problem is I can't do a 1 minute video. I've never been able to do a 1 minute video. So you would have me talk for like 20 minutes and then cut, 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 cut to get
edit.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah. So yeah,
that's
I
great.
just one day maybe, but there's this one woman who does reviews on Instagram and TikTok, and she does them while she's knitting.
Oh, I'll be darned.
It's really interesting. I'm
Yeah.
like, how did you pair those two together? But
Everybody
so
finds a niche, and that's
they
what makes them
find their
popular,
niche, and
right?
I don't
Yeah.
know. Mine would have to be I'm doing puzzles and talking. I don't know. But anyway,
Well, you can find more information about Sabrina and her amazing research, and also information about some of the books that she had differently abled characters in, too. You have a really nice list there. I thought that was great. All of that can be found on Sabrina's website at sabrinajeffries.com. Sabrina, thank you so much for joining me. This was such a pleasure. I loved hearing your stories and just diving into your new release. It was so much fun.
well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely, anytime. Many thanks to everyone listening. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Undercurrents of Romance. You can find more information about the show at traceydevlyn.com/podcast. Undercurrents of Romance is a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. I'll be back soon with another great romantic read. In the meantime, enjoy the adventure, everyone.